Red Bay is kind of unusual because it's located geographically on a kind of a plateau, and the plateau gradually goes off to Freeport, but you have the Bruce Creek Valley on the north, and that's drained by Bruce Creek, and the other between Freeport's drained by Seven Runs, and it's up on a hill, a kind of a hill deal. And my daddy and mom came there early days, 1937. Daddy paid the expenses of one of the old cousins and got, I think, about 80 acres for $100. And my daughter and son-in-laws built a new house right there where I was raised. But anyway, Red Bay name came from the red bay tree. The red bay tree had the leaves that they marketed for seasoning or something, and the legend was that people came in to gather those leaves, and that's how the name came up. But previous to that, in the very early days, it was called Mushy Bend because of the bend in the river there behind Charles Morgan's place, and also the mud, I guess. Then later, Mossy Bend from the Spanish moss. So Red Bay's had three names. And during that time, the plantation that's now called the plantation between Freeport and Red Bay, you had animals, people had cattle and hogs and other animals running free grazing. And I remember going with my dad to throw corn out to the hogs. He'd blow the car horn, here hogs would come, and we'd ride around out there, and if we noticed that there was a cow that had a new calf, Daddy had a book with all the brands, or all the, really not brands, but they made slits in the ears of the cows, and he would write down, and then at church on Sunday, he'd tell the person that cow had a new calf. Well, that ended with the stock law, and Ingram McDonald and the Scrub Oak Cowboys, they call themselves, they rounded up the cows and would haul them to the sale for just a small fee. So they had a lot of cowboying going on during that time. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know about that Patrick Pilcher and I talked about was there's a formation of sand dunes out on the plantation that looks like you just took about 5 acres of dunes at the beach and just moved them up there. It covers about 5 acres. It must be about 50 feet tall if you measured it. Snow white beach sand, stunted magnolias, and we were hoping that we could make some kind of preservation of that, because people don't even know it was there. I used to play on it as a kid when we'd go by. There was an old road that went from Rock Hill Road, dirt road, diagonal to Freeport, and we'd go through there to Freeport. But it's a very unusual place. It must have been a geological thing that happened back during when the water was higher or whatever. And the industries that we had out on the plantation were turpentine, and like I said, the cattle, and then the turpentine industry followed by the logging. They turpentined them, they cut them down, and then tar wood. Many people don't know what tar wood is, but the stump of the fat pine, they'd blow that out with dynamite and load it up and then render the tar out of those stumps. And when I was small, we'd get the light wood, or the lighters people called it, out of the stumps. We'd go bust a piece off to build fires and stuff. Another thing about Red Bay is people identify Red Bay with the three little churches that have always, for about over 150 years, gone to church together. And the reason we think there is that Presbyterians came in there first and started build a wooden church. And then later some Methodists came to town and they all went together. Then later the Methodists decided they could get some resources to build a, quote, Methodist church. Presbyterians helped them with the land next door. And they built their church, and then the Baptists were across the road by the cemetery. And while I'm on that, the cemetery, the first person that was buried in Walton County that was not a Native American was Peggy Folk. That's in the Walton County history. And she was buried at the Red Bay Cemetery when the cemetery did not exist. It was just woods. And they think because of the rich artifacts, and there's several archaeological sites that have been explored, and then of course they're not identified for lack of people bothering them. Right there in the middle of Red Bay, that's an ancient heritage tradition, and they think she was probably buried there because it might have had some kind of significance. And the cemetery is 1824. Well, the beginning of McClendon, and there were the McClendons in Uchiana, and Henry Marie in Aliquot, and there was a pocket of people in the valley. Now this is not Uchi Valley's church, it's the valley, what we call Valley View. There was a pocket of people there. There was a pocket of people between Red Bay and Bruce. Seemed like all at the same time, and we don't know a lot about that. And also LaGrange, down near Freeport, there was a pocket of folks. And this was the very early days in the early 1820s. And well, my granddad, John Grice, he was a carpenter, and it's almost like the movie about Vinny. My father was a carpenter, my uncle was a carpenter, you know, like that. My daddy's two brothers were carpenters, and he was a carpenter, and back then carpenters were jacks of all trades and did rough carpentry and that kind of thing. But my grandpa, he built coffins for people, and he built concrete tombstones, block in, make a form, make the tombstone, let it cure about half, and then he'd tap the letters in. And we found a tombstone when they were building my daughter's house, buried in the ground at my old place. And it was, we figured out, my wife figured out, it was misspelled. So Grandpa probably made a new one and left it there, but nobody was buried there, of course. But a neat thing about the Red Bay Cemetery, back to that, I remember they always had cemetery trustees, a Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian. Well, the Baptist church is on the same side as the cemetery. And to show you that even back then people were concerned about everyone getting along, having an even chance and all that, there was a slave cemetery that jutted off the side from the old days. Well, the three trustees said, two of them said, well, we may as well just make the fence straight, include them and everybody, right thing to do. Only one didn't want to do it. But the Baptist guy, it was Baptist land, so he could have had it done anyway. So while the guy that didn't want it done was not around, they called the fence company to put in the post. So when he came back, he was a little bit aggravated, but he said, well, we can't move the post. So everybody was included, no matter who it was, and they put a tombstone outside the wall dedicated to anybody that they happened to miss by accident. That's outside the Baptist church. Okay, I'm ready for the Red Bay School. I'm a school man. I spent half of my life at Walton High School. I'm 78, was there 39 and a half years, even taught the well-known Ron Kelly. Probably got him into the video arts. But anyway, the Red Bay schools, we had a schoolhouse that had 2 classrooms and a cafetorium, they called it, because it had an auditorium and a cafeteria in one big room. Well, it burned in the 50s. When I was in the 3rd third grade, I think it was. And so, what did they do? The three churches at Red Bay were old wooden churches. And they let us go to school in the Methodist church and converted the old Baptist church into the lunchroom temporarily. What did the rest of the congregations do? Everybody went to the Presbyterian church with no problem. Now, if they have an air conditioning problem and my friend Rodney Enfinger is supposed to preach at the Baptist church, they just move it over to the Methodist and he preaches. But anyway, Bob Spence and my dad built the little community center building that's now was the school, and that's where I went my last 3 years. And then I went to Walton High School in the 7th grade, and then only from that time on, only went to college 4 years, and I'm back at Walton High with the teachers that taught me. Now that's one of those. But that school building was built with $6,000. They paid my dad, and that included materials. And he and Bob Spence was 18, I was 8, and Daddy was on up, but it covered the materials and the labor. And one thing about the area history, Pensacola would have been the oldest city in America had the hurricane not wiped out the initial settlement. But that happened, and then in 1565, St. Augustine beat them to the punch, and St. Augustine became the oldest city, and Pensacola would have been. But connecting the two Spanish cities was the Spanish Trail, which ran not along Highway 90 exactly. It even dipped up around Lake Jackson and then angled back down toward Pensacola or Pace or that way. But it was unusual that we had the highway was here. It was not a highway, it was a trail during that time.